The letter was sitting on my kitchen table when I got home, and I knew what it was before I even touched it. I had been expecting it for weeks. Still, seeing the words printed in that flat, bureaucratic font made everything feel suddenly, horribly real. 14 days. That was how long I had before I would have to leave the apartment I had been living in for the past 2 years in Edmonton, Alberta. I sat down on the floor beside the table, not in a chair, on the floor, and just stared at it for a long time. My name is Ryan Paterson, and up until 8 months before that letter arrived, I had been doing fine. Not great, but fine. I was 28, working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction management firm downtown. It wasn't the career I had imagined when I was studying at the University of Alberta, but it paid well, I was good at it, and I had finally gotten to the point where I wasn't checking my bank balance before buying groceries. That feeling, that small ordinary freedom, turned out to be a lot more fragile than I understood. The firm I worked for lost a major provincial contract in the spring. It happened fast, the way these things always seem to happen fast. 1 week everything was normal, the next week there were closed-door meetings, and the week after that, 12 of us received layoff notices. I was one of them. I told myself it would be fine. I had a little savings, maybe 4 months of runway if I was careful. I updated my resume that same evening and started applying the next morning. 4 months came and went. The job market in Edmonton that year was not kind. Oil prices had dipped again, and the knock-on effects were everywhere. Construction, engineering, project management, the fields I knew were all shedding positions, not adding them. I broadened my search. I applied to logistics companies, property management firms, government administrative roles. I rewrote my cover letter so many times I stopped being able to tell whether it sounded confident or desperate. Probably both. I got interviews. Some of them went well enough that I let myself feel hopeful for a day or two, and then the silence would come, and I would know. By October, I was 3 months behind on rent. My landlord was a man named Harold Bracewell. He was in his late 50s, owned a small portfolio of rental properties across the city, and managed them himself with the help of a part-time assistant. He wasn't unkind, exactly, but he was a businessman, and our relationship had always been transactional and professional. I had slipped a handwritten note under his office door in August explaining my situation and asking for more time. He had texted back that he understood and that we could work something out for a month. Then August turned into September, and September turned into October, and when I finally got the formal notice, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like the last door in a long hallway finally swinging shut. I didn't tell anyone for a while. Not my parents, who were back in Lethbridge and would have worried themselves sick. Not my friends, most of whom were busy with their own lives, their own mortgages and new babies and problems I didn't want to add to. Keeping it quiet felt like the last bit of control I had. If nobody knew, then it wasn't completely real yet. It was just a problem between me and a letter on a kitchen table. But problems have a way of becoming real whether or not you talk about them. By the 5th day after receiving the notice, I had started going through my apartment deciding what to keep and what to sell. I listed a few things on Facebook Marketplace: a bookshelf, a barely used exercise bike, some kitchen equipment I had bought when I was still optimistic about cooking. I figured out that if I sold everything and moved into the cheapest room rental I could find, I could stretch what was left in my account for maybe 6 more weeks. 6 weeks to find a job. 6 weeks to figure out a life. I want to pause for a second, if you're still with me, and ask you to do something. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who might need to hear that hard seasons don't last forever. And if you're new here, subscribe to Courage Stories. It means more than you know. Now let me tell you about the phone call that changed everything. It came on the 6th day, in the early afternoon while I was wrapping a lamp in newspaper. It was Harold. I let it ring twice before answering, because I assumed he was calling to confirm logistics about the move-out, and I wasn't sure I had the emotional bandwidth for that conversation. But when I picked up, his tone was different from what I expected. He wasn't calling to talk about timelines or damage deposits. He said he had been thinking about my situation since he sent the notice, and that he wanted to talk. Not on the phone, in person, at his office if I was available. I said I was available. His office was on 124th Street, above a dry cleaning shop. I had only been there once before when I first signed my lease. The space was small and a little cluttered, with filing cabinets along one wall and a window that looked out over the parking lot. Harold was already there when I arrived. He shook my hand, offered me coffee, and we sat down on opposite sides of his desk. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I had the strange feeling that he was trying to figure out how to start, which wasn't something I had expected from him. He had always seemed like a man who didn't spend a lot of time on second thoughts. Then he asked me to tell him what had happened. Not the summary version he already knew, but the whole thing. I almost deflected. There is a particular kind of pride that kicks in when you're embarrassed about your circumstances. A voice that says, keep it vague, stay professional, don't let him see how bad it actually got. But something about the way Harold was sitting there, not leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, but forward, elbows on the desk, actually listening, made that voice go quiet. So I told him. The layoff, the job search, the months of applications, the dwindling account, the feeling of waking up every morning and not recognizing the version of myself that was living this particular life. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said he appreciated me being honest with him, and that he had a reason for asking that went beyond the rent situation. What he told me next I hadn't known at all, though in retrospect I don't know why it would have come up in a landlord-tenant relationship. Harold's Bracewell had not always been a property manager. For most of his 40s, he had run a small but well-regarded trades training program out of a church hall in the north end of the city. It had started as a favor to his brother-in-law, who was trying to help new immigrants get certified in electrical and plumbing work, and it had grown into something much bigger than either of them expected. They had helped hundreds of people get their Red Seal certifications, find apprenticeships, build careers. The program had eventually wound down when his brother-in-law moved to BC and Harold's own life shifted, but it was something he had never quite let go of. He had been thinking about starting something again, he said. Something updated. Not just trades, but a broader skills and employment resource for people in transition, young professionals who had been laid off, newcomers navigating the Alberta job market, people who had been out of the workforce for a few years and didn't know how to re-enter it. He had even scouted a space, a ground-floor unit in one of his own buildings on the north side that had been empty for several months. But he was 73 now, and he knew he couldn't run it himself. He needed someone younger, someone with project coordination experience, someone who understood systems and timelines and how to manage multiple moving parts at once. He looked at me across the desk and said he thought that someone might be me. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I remember looking at the window behind him and watching a car pull slowly out of the parking lot below, as if that was a more manageable thing to process than what he had just said. I told him I didn't understand what he was proposing. He laid it out plainly. He would cancel the eviction notice. I could stay in the apartment. He would defer my back rent for 6 months, with a repayment plan we would build together once I was back on my feet financially. In exchange, he wanted me to take on the role of program coordinator for the new center, managing logistics, reaching out to partner organizations and training providers, handling intake for participants, building the operational framework from scratch. It wasn't paid work initially, not until the center secured some funding, but he was applying to the Alberta government's community development grants and was confident the funding would come within a few months. I asked him why he trusted me with something like this. I had never run a nonprofit. I had coordinated construction projects, not community programs. He said that the skills weren't as different as I was imagining. And then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said that the people who build the most useful things are usually the ones who've needed something like it at some point in their own lives. I drove home slowly that evening. Edmonton in late October is not a beautiful city. The leaves are long gone. The sky is that particular shade of gray that settles in and doesn't lift until April, and the cold has a dry bite to it that gets into your coat no matter how good your coat is. But I remember that drive being somehow different from every other drive I had taken in the past several months. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure yet what to do with it, but it was there. I called Harold the next morning and told him yes. The space he had in mind was a wide-open plan unit on 97th Avenue with big windows and concrete floors and absolutely nothing else. I stood in the middle of it on a Wednesday morning in early November, holding a cup of Tim Hortons coffee and a notepad, trying to figure out where to begin. Harold had given me a budget for basic renovation and furnishings, contacts at several community organizations he had relationships with, and the name of a woman at the city's employment services office who he said would be a crucial ally. Beyond that, it was mine to build. Her name was Sandra Thibault. She was the regional coordinator for Edmonton's employment and social development partnerships, and when I called her and explained what we were doing, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Finally." She had been trying to get something like this off the ground for years through official channels and kept running into bureaucratic walls. A private initiative with community backing was exactly the gap she had been watching for. She agreed to meet the following week. That meeting changed the trajectory of everything. Sandra brought in 2 colleagues from the local YMCA's employment program, a contact at Norquest College who oversaw trades partnerships, and a woman named Gwen Fairley who ran a small nonprofit that helped youth aging out of the foster care system find stable housing and employment. Within 2 weeks, I had a network of partner organizations, a draft framework for the center's first 3 programs, and a name, the Bracewell Community Skills Centre. Harold had pushed back a little on using his name, in the mild, self-effacing way of a man who is quietly proud but doesn't want to appear to be. I told him it wasn't about ego, it was about accountability. When the community knows a real person is behind something, they trust it more. He thought about that for a moment, then said okay. The next months were unlike anything I had experienced before. I was up early every morning, not because anxiety was chasing me, but because there was genuinely too much to do and I wanted to do it. I was coordinating with contractors who were finishing the renovation on a tight budget, communicating with partner organizations about intake processes, writing sections of the grant application Harold had started, reaching out to local employers about participating in a job placement program. My background in project coordination turned out to matter enormously. I knew how to build timelines, manage competing priorities, and communicate across multiple stakeholders without letting things fall through the cracks. For the first time in months, I felt like a person using their actual abilities. The center opened in late January. We had 33 participants registered for the first cohort, which was more than any of us had projected. The programs ran on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings, which made them accessible to people who were working part-time or managing childcare. We offered resume and interview preparation, digital skills workshops, information sessions on provincial certification pathways, and one-on-one sessions with employment navigators. Some of the people who walked through the door in those first weeks I will never forget. There was a man named Kevin, 51 years old, who had spent his career in oil and gas and was trying to pivot after his employer restructured. He sat in the back corner at first, arms crossed, the body language of someone who has been told too many times that a program like this is going to fix them. By week 3, he had started staying late to talk to the other participants. He told me one evening that the most useful thing the center had given him was not any specific skill, but the realization that he wasn't the only person in his situation, and that there was nothing wrong with needing to ask for directions when you're in unfamiliar territory. There was a young woman named Amara, 23, who had come to Canada from Nigeria with her family as a teenager and was working 2 part-time jobs while trying to get her accounting credentials recognized by CPA Canada. She came in exhausted and left with a specific set of contacts and a clearer understanding of the bridging programs available to her. She enrolled in a qualifying exam prep course at Grant MacEwan University 4 months later. There was a man named Brent Kowalczyk, who was 34 and had been off work for 2 years following a workplace injury. He had fallen into the gap between WCB support and employment readiness, the kind of gap that sounds bureaucratic and abstract until you're the person living in it. He came to us not knowing where to start. He left the first cohort with a referral to a supported employment program and, eventually, a part-time position at a building supply company where the work was physically manageable and the people were good. Every one of those stories reminded me, in ways I wasn't always able to articulate out loud, of the 6 weeks I had spent sitting on my apartment floor trying to figure out what my life was going to look like. The provincial grant came through in March. It was enough to fund 18 months of operations and create 2 paid staff positions. Harold asked me to take one of them, program director, and I said yes without needing a moment to think about it. I want to stop here before I tell you how things continued to develop and ask something of you. Please leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and whether you've ever experienced a moment when something that felt like an ending turned out to be something else entirely. Those comments matter more than you know, and they might be exactly what someone else watching this video needs to read today. The center is still running. 3 years in, we have served more than 800 people in Edmonton and the surrounding region. Harold is still involved in an advisory capacity, and he comes in on the last Saturday of every month without fail, makes a point of shaking hands with every participant he can find, and always remembers their names. I asked him once where that habit came from. He said his brother-in-law had told him early on that nothing makes a person feel more seen than being remembered. It had stuck with him. I am still, technically, a tenant of Harold Bracewell's. I pay rent now, on time, and have for the better part of 2.5 years. Sometimes I pass the kitchen table where that eviction letter sat, and I think about the version of me who sat on the floor beside it. I don't feel sorry for him. He was doing the best he could with what he had. But I am glad, more than I know how to say, that a phone call came on the 6th day. There is something I believe now that I didn't believe then, or at least couldn't feel the truth of in the way you can only feel something after you've lived it. The hardest seasons have a way of clarifying what you are actually capable of, not because hardship makes you stronger in some automatic, inspirational way, but because it forces you into contact with parts of yourself that don't surface when everything is comfortable. The version of me who showed up to build that center was the same person who had been coordinating construction projects for 3 years. I just didn't know, until there was nothing left to lose, that I could build something that actually mattered. If this story meant something to you today, please share it with someone you think might need to hear it. Subscribe to Courage Stories if you haven't already, and if you're going through something hard right now, I want you to know that the fact you're still here, still watching, still looking for a reason to keep going, that counts for something. It really does. The phone call comes when you least expect it. Sometimes it just takes one person deciding to see you differently than the situation you're in. That changed everything for me. It might be closer than you think for you.